In the last few chapters, we saw how governments are necessary to maintain unjust societies. They need to exist to defend social inequalities, to defend private property. We have seen that competition between individuals goes against human nature and that progress is done through cooperation. And finally, we saw that we should abolish private property and its protector, the government, in order to work together for the common interest. Malatesta lists off a couple of common objections to these points and answers them. Let's see how. My name is Sean, and welcome to Germinal. The listed objections are by authoritarians, and by authoritarians, Malatesta doesn't only mean the proponents of dictatorships and monarchies, but anybody who supports authority, both on the right and on the left. The first objection to the abolition of the government comes from authoritarian socialists, and it goes as follows. Once private property is abolished and there are no more class and privileges, the government would change its nature. It would be impossible for it to defend the interests of a particular class since there wouldn't be any more classes. The government could then truly defend the interests of all, organize our society, and protect us against people who try to reintroduce privilege. We'll go back to that in a minute. Malatesta then lists other objections, such as some positions in society are just too important to leave to the free will of individuals. If it isn't the government, who would distribute food, provide healthcare and education? Who would organize large-scale projects such as bridges, scientific research, etc.? Who would have the power to prevent and punish crime? What about the people who don't care about solidarity? Who wouldn't want to work? Who would spread diseases by not taking care of themselves, or people that would use violence for their own pleasure? Who would stop them, if not the government? Taking down the government would mean the destruction of social organization, everyone for oneself, the domination of one over the other. In one word, chaos. Malatesta will answer all these questions and concerns in the following chapters. First, he answers to the authoritarian socialists by saying that even if you abolish private property and change the social conditions of society, the government wouldn't change its nature. It would still seek to dominate. Malatesta talks about it in terms of organ and function. An organ has a function. A heart pumps blood. Now, if you take away the function of an organ, it will either die or find a way to reestablish that function. Now let's apply this to a social organ, an army. Its function is to fight. If the army has no reason to fight, if there are no threats, the army would either have to create a fight or disintegrate. The police force, if there are no crimes, would either have to create crime or disappear. Finally, a government and its function, defending privileges, would either have to create privileges or collapse in the absence of privileges to defend. And we could argue that in a classless society, a government couldn't defend the interests of a particular class unless the government itself was a class. The group of people, the one that governs, is in charge of the collective power. It has immense power, and because of that, we have to recognize that they form a privileged class. They have power and privileges, and everything would lead us to believe that they would protect this power and these privileges. If someone or a group of people contests that power or a decision the government made, they would have to be dealt with. And then the old story of the privileged class, which arises through the complicity of the government, starts all over again. And in this instance, if it did not seize the land, would certainly capture key posts, specially created, and would oppress and exploit no less than the capitalist class. And thus government would be passed to and fro in the same hands, and democracy, which is the alleged government of all, would end up, as usual, in an oligarchy, which is the government of a few, the government of a class. And what an all-powerful, oppressive, all-absorbing oligarchy must be one which has at its service, that is, at its disposal, all social wealth, all public services, from food to the manufacture of matches, from the universities to the music halls. Keep in mind, Malatesta wrote this in 1891, decades before the 1917 Russian Revolution. Next chapter, we'll ask ourselves, what if a government wasn't a class? And we'll see if that would justify the existence of a government in a socialist society. We'll also answer to the very interesting question asked earlier: who would have the power to prevent and punish crime?